Hi, Grace, and welcome to Vogue Codes. It's so great to have you with us this year.
Thanks for having me, Victoria. Great to be here.
We've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to get straight into it. I'm going to throw you back to your wonderful Australia Day address in January of this year. You said that if in the bush, if something breaks, you fix it yourself. Is that what you were doing with Buy from the Bush?
That's so interesting. That is what I think happens in rural communities. You know, when you live in the city, which I grew up in the city, and I know when the air conditioning breaks, you call the air conditioning guy. When you've got, when your pet's sick, you call the vet. You've got guys for everything to fix your problems. But in the bush, when something goes wrong, you are the guy. You have to do it yourself because you're a long way from anybody. So I don't think I was conscious that I was trying to fix something, but I was seeing women or people in small business everywhere in rural communities working really hard and innovating and doing things to get through these lean times. And actually what we needed at that time was help from others, which is different to, I think, the norm for rural communities. So this drought was so significant and it had gone on so long, we couldn't fix it ourselves. And actually what we needed was some help from the city and in the way of investment and cash flow to get us through and to keep small businesses kicking.
For those who haven't heard the story, I don't know the story, maybe we should just go back a step. If you take us back to, I think it was 16th of October 2019, so just over a year ago, you're on your farm near Warren in New South Wales. You're seeing your local community really struggling into, I think, a third year of drought. You're due at lunch with friends in an hour. That's the moment you started the Buy from the Bush Instagram account?
Yes, exactly. That's so true. I was running late. I did not have time to start a movement, but I sat at the bench. I actually wrote a letter to nobody. I didn't know who it was addressed to, but I wanted to. I'd been listening to this radio interview about the drought, and it was igniting something in me because they were talking about drought in terms of government funding packages and relief efforts, but not about the human lived experience. And I kind of sat. I had a few tough conversations with friends locally about what they were going through, about fears around mental health. We've been living through some pretty rough times, and the talk about funding packages and drought relief efforts at a policy government level seemed to be missing the point. And I wanted the broader Australian community to care about what we were living through and to understand why it's important if in a prolonged drought like that, agriculture fails because, by extension, it also means rural communities fail and households are under enormous strain. So I started writing this letter. It was addressed to nobody, and it was just explaining what we were going through. And then I realised that I didn't really have a call to action, and I didn't know what, I wasn't really saying what we needed. So I kind of closed the letter and went into Canva and created a logo and then created an Instagram account and walked out the door to go to lunch and thought I'll do this tonight.
Did you tell them about it when you got to lunch, or had you talked about it with anyone beforehand?
No, I hadn't mentioned it to anybody because I hadn't really thought of it before then. It was really something that I just, I knew that there was incredible things on offer in the bush. These boutiques around me were really unique, things that you don't necessarily get in the high street stores in Sydney. And I wanted, or in a mall, the kind of curated collections of a boutique, and they were on the verge of closure. And I knew that if we could connect those beautiful businesses and makers and creators with a new audience, that something great might happen. But I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. And so I went to lunch and I sat at lunch with friends and we were all talking, as we did, we kind of would talk about dust instead of depression because that was easier to do. And we were having the same old conversations. And so I kind of, quietly mentioned it to a couple of friends at the end of the table that I've just created this Instagram account. And I thought it might be a good idea in these really, lame tones. And they were kind of laughing, thinking, what are you going to do with this thing? You've got 6 followers, and they're all my family members. And then by the next day, a friend of mine screenshotted my page and it had 100 followers in the 24 hours. And she was like, oh, hang on. And then, of course, a week later I think we had 10,000 followers or something. So it was, it grew quite quickly.
So you realised pretty fast that you were going to have an impact. I guess you probably didn't know how big it was going to get. And you were looking for connection. I guess storytelling was part of what you were trying to do to connect the city and the bush. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, because it might sound strange. Like I'm really sharing content of other, of small business on an Instagram feed. Like, how is that storytelling? But what I wanted to do was to say, look, the drought is a farmer in a paddock with dying sheep. We see those images all the time in the media, but drought is also women and small business owners working really hard in rural communities to generate cash flow in lean times and diversify their income stream and trying to survive when cash flow from the broader community that relies on agriculture dries up. So I was trying to present a different picture of drought and a different picture of rural communities, and to show that it's nuanced and it's diverse, and there's beautiful, incredible businesses that are really worthwhile, and that I knew that my friends and family in the city would love to connect with. So Instagram was kind of that storytelling mechanism for doing that, by sharing beautiful content, telling a bit of the story of the business owner, and allowing consumers, like within the context of meaningful consumption. What's more meaningful than shopping from a small business in the middle of nowhere and knowing that your dollars are going not just to that business owner, but to the local post office and the cafe and the painter, and probably, allowing local employment and all of those things.
Sure. And a lot of the small businesses that you have highlighted are owned by women in the bush. Was that a kind of conscious thing for you?
No, it wasn't. Because actually there's a story to be told about agriculture too, about, we only ever talk about the bush in times of crisis, and often it's this battler narrative. And, I married into a farming business having come from the city, and I was astounded at the skill set that you need to be a farmer in modern Australia is, they're scientists, they're financial traders, they're animal nutritionists. It's incredible. And they're innovators. And ag tech, for example, is booming industry. Australia are really leading the way in that. And yet we only talk about farmers in this kind of really simplistic battler kind of frame. So, no, I wanted to tell the story of rural communities more broadly. But, of course, in the drought, women step up and step to the fore. And so the products and the businesses I was showcasing on Instagram, I think 97 or 8% of those are run by women. And, it wasn't a conscious thought, but, of course, that is the reality of what happens.
And how do you think, obviously you were trying to connect the city and the bush better, do you think the connection had been lost, or do you think it was just sort of out of date, that we all have these sort of Banjo Patterson dreams of what the bush is?
Great question. I don't think it's lost. I actually think there's a great interest and nostalgia, and people in the city really want to connect with rural identity, and I think at that time we knew. I think people in the city knew about drought, but just possibly had a pretty two-dimensional understanding of what that was. So allowing like a direct connection through Instagram and through Buy from the Bush was just tapping into something that already existed. I do think that it's hard to understand. It's a really hard thing to relate to culturally. If the life in rural Australia is really different to the city, and there's kind of, I think the onus is on rural communities to try and tell that story a bit better and engage people in the city in a way that's accessible and enlightening. So no, I don't think there's a conscious disconnect, but yeah, I think there's work to be done in terms of growing the understanding of both the city and the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to avoid the kind of them and us feeling from either.
Yes.
Either.
Yes, that's right.
So I think when you launched it, you had Christmas shopping in mind. You launched in October, hoping to get everyone to do their Christmas shopping. How far beyond that had you thought?
Not very far, not very far. I suppose what I thought was, if you discover these beautiful businesses, then you'll be a customer for life. Because I know that there's a point of difference. Um, as I said, you're shopping small, but there's a customer service element. I think when you shop from a bush business, especially in the midst of a crisis, because they were so grateful for the custom. So I did know that my idea was to grow the reach of these businesses and connect them with new audiences. And if they, people were reporting up to 5,000 new followers after I shared them on Instagram. And I knew that really 5,000 new followers is 5,000 warm leads for that business going forward. So no, we were kind of working really hard to a Christmas deadline and just trying to grow the impact as much as possible, and then stop and think about it after that. But of course, in January, bushfires took hold, and there was a renewed interest and a renewed, I suppose, relevance of Buy from the Bush. So we continued to grow and kind of evolve.
Incredible. And then after all this work, which you're just doing amongst your other job, your then 3 children and your family life on the farm, I guess comes a reckoning of what next. And a year later, I know you've just launched the Buy from the Bush marketplace. I'd love to hear about that evolution and how it happened.
Yes. So as I said, we thought we'd consolidate earlier in the year, and then who knew what was going to happen? So it's been a funny old year, and we partnered with PayPal in the lead up to Christmas last year, and it was this really great partnership. And they had this they got what we were about from the start, and it was about supporting small business and telling that nuanced version of things that, not the poor bugger like goodwill charity angle, but the investment, impressive, innovative, creative things that we were showcasing. Let's get customers to engage in that. So when we were originally thinking, what can this be? We kind of tossed up the not-for-profit angle or commercialising. And I really believe that the greater impact will come from this being a business, and from really tapping into that investment and not charity idea. So we had a few people interested in investing, but I kind of felt that I wanted a corporate partner that would bring to this what I didn't have. It was just me and a friend working in it, and I had another friend helping me with PR. So it was about accessing a skill set and reach that we couldn't get, and commercialising it in a way that was true to our core purpose, which was connecting bush business with new customers. So we decided to get back in touch with PayPal and talk to them about this idea of developing it into a marketplace, which, as you said, just launched last year. So it was kind of it took some time for me to land on what Buy from the Bush could be, and to kind of accept the idea that it was going to be revenue generating and grow into something that I hadn't necessarily intended initially. But I suppose along the last 12 months, it's been so clear that our community and our customers have enjoyed it as much as the businesses have, and there is definitely it's really got legs. So we just needed the infrastructure around it to ensure long-term sustainable support for these rural communities, and I'm hoping the marketplace is that next step towards achieving that and kind of sustaining Buy from the Bush as a business in itself.
Congratulations on that launch. It sounds incredibly busy and like a huge amount of work. Do you hold the secret of time management and prioritization that we're all searching for?
Life is out of control. Without a doubt, I am not managing life. And it has been 12 months of just non-stop work and putting everything else on hold. And now, as you mentioned, it wasn't revenue generating. So we were volunteers and it was a minuscule team. But now I'm looking to build, a team of employees and actually paying people and getting some new skills on and allowing us to kind of really, I suppose, lay the foundations for a business that will grow quite significantly, and not just always catching up with ourselves. So no, time management, that's elusive.
I'm glad to hear you're human. Um, I imagine that this whole experience, though, must have had a really positive impact on your own sense of confidence and confidence in yourself as a leader. Would you agree with that?
Um, yeah, that's probably fair. I think what it has taught me, I mean, I, like so many women, I think, have been, it's funny, I'm a fairly confident person, but in a work context, that's probably where I feel vulnerable um, and, and definitely suffer from the imposter syndrome. But in this context, because I didn't have skin in the game and I wasn't selling something of my own, I was selling on behalf of others, I didn't have cringe. And I also wasn't trying, there was no pretense because I was saying exactly what I was, which was a city girl living in the country um, and just trying to have a crack at something. And that freedom to not have to be an expert allowed me to actually tap into probably my value proposition as a person. So I could see with city eyes what the bush was producing and know what people might want. I was, the youngest of five, and I knew what shopping for five different people might be like. I could tap into kind of different tastes, and so there are all these. They seem insignificant, but I actually think it was about bringing all my skills to the to the foreground and employing them without restraint and not having any worry about the consequences of getting things wrong. And it was all about progress and not perfection. And I think because it wasn't a commercial business, there was much less risk in doing that. So it's taught me a lesson. I think if I can take that learning of tapping into kind of your broad lived experience, not the stuff that you think is relevant to a really defined role in a defined organisation, just absorbing your lived experience and then inserting it into your work life. I think there's incredible power to be gained from that, and especially in times of COVID, like we're all trying to do business in new ways, communicate in new ways, and I think it's also apt that you would, as a person, pivot in the way you approach work and look at that in new ways. So I've drawn confidence from being myself really in this experiment.
That's really inspiring advice. I think that you can ascribe value that you maybe don't to the qualities that you have as a person that you don't always use at work, but can be
exactly
used
and I
to do something you really care about.
And I think like what happened when Bike from the Bush happened was that I would get a phone call from a journalist. Like I remember in the first week I got a radio host call me and asked for an interview, and all I wanted to do was say no, thank you. Oh no, thank you. But I had to say yes because I knew that making noise would, improve the impact of this thing. So I had to lean into that, and in doing so, I don't know, I suppose you learn on the fly, and mistakes don't matter so much. There's just this freedom as a result. And often I get sent a request for a bio, or I mean, how often have you tried to make your LinkedIn profile look good and you look at it and think, like, that is not reflective of my true potential. Like I couldn't say that I was quite good at cooking butter chicken. Like that's just, what does that mean? But in this experience, I think I've learned that like all those things that you might not say in a job interview because you'd be too embarrassed to say it, and not the butter chicken, but other things, they're relevant. Like when you're trying to start a business or to start a project, all of those things are relevant, and to employ them without restraint is, that's my takeaway.
Yeah, it's good entrepreneurship lessons, I think.
Yeah.
I want to ask about Stay from the Bush, which you've also launched, and which I hope has benefited from us all being restricted to our own beautiful states. Tell us how it's going and how that evolved.
Yeah, so Stay in the Bush is it was just a sister page because people were wanting to support rural communities and asking me where to stay. And in the wake of international lockdown, I just saw this great opportunity to ramp that up and launched a website, which is just a directory of beautiful accommodation to inspire you to get off the beaten track. And you can find that beautiful boutique hotel or luxe B&B, or if you want a great family stay on a farm. And again, it's that storytelling element. I kind of wanted to show what rural communities could offer beyond what we know, in that really basic understanding of, like, the motor inn or camping. So it's going really well. I think it's been a stop-start approach because of Victoria had their second wave of lockdown, and just knowing what the right message is at the moment has been difficult to navigate. But the positive is that rural accommodation outside of Victoria, I just keep hearing from people, and they're doing so well. And people are really, for once, I think, looking at their backyard and searching for those authentic, really Australian experiences, which I think you can get in rural communities, more so than, if you go to those hot coastal hotspots, for example.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a silver lining to this whole situation. So now that you're on this kind of business track, I guess, do you see any further extensions or ideas for kind of broadening your mission?
I do have lots of ideas. I'm actually my focus at the moment is to rein in the ideas, and this marketplace is my first step in commercialising Buy from the Bush, and I want to do a really good job of it. And that means, like, just simple, like, we launched with 145 rural businesses. I think we've had over 300 people apply since we launched to sell through the marketplace. So onboarding all of those businesses is time consuming. And I want to learn this business model really well before I start to dabble in other things. But as I said, I am growing the team, and with that team will come greater capacity to kind of tap into other ideas. And for me, what excites me and inspires me is storytelling and wanting to connect city and country in creative ways. So, lots of ideas, but hopefully executing one or two of them really well, because over the last 12 months, I haven't worried too much about the finer details. It's just been about reach and growing the platform, and it was all the social media movement. So there's some consolidation to be done.
And what is that sort of hiring stage? How's that been for you? Because you kind of have to sort of acknowledge that you can't do everything, think about what you're actually not good at, and find people ideally who are better than you at all these things. Is that been challenging, or has that been quite rewarding?
It's so I find it really challenging, and it's what I really want to do is employ people in the bush. Obviously, there's incredible idle skill sets, but it means working remotely and engaging people who live a long way away from you, trying to create a culture and a team. And what my approach so far, and I'll get back to you on whether it's the right thing to do or not, but I think what I'm trying to do is employ generalists, people with, in fact, I spoke to Mia Friedman the other day, and I said, I've got a few questions for you about building a business, because she talks to lady startups so much. And I asked her about key hires, and actually she affirmed this idea of hiring generalists as you grow your business, because as a founder, you're across so many things. You've got to have a broad skill set. You've got to engage in lots of little things. So early on, I'm hoping that by getting people who kind of connect with the culture and the ideals of Buy from the Bush more so than they have a really defined skill set, hoping by engaging those people we'll be able to kind of grow with them and tap into opportunities as those people develop into the roles, I suppose. So we'll see. But so far, I think I've got somebody in Tumut, New South Wales, in Walgett, New South Wales, two of us here in Warren, and that's really rewarding for me. Like the success of Buy from the Bush has filtered through. There's been multiplier effects through many small businesses and local communities, but now Buy from the Bush itself is becoming a rural employer. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it must feel incredible to have so much purpose in what you're doing. I think This is probably the last question. Do you see Buy from the Bush now as your life's work?
No, I see it as the last year of my life,
Yeah.
and now I'm beginning on a track to to transform it into a business, and I really hope that business has long-term impact for small business in rural communities. But no, not my life's work. In another 20 years, we'll reflect on that. And I've got a 6-month-old baby, and I don't know that. Yeah, I just think that lots can change. So I'm really about one job at a time, and hoping that I grow this into something that has long-term positive impact.
I think that's an amazing place to finish up. Grace, thank you so much for your positivity, your optimism, and most of all your action, everything you've done, all the work you've done. It's so great to have you part of Vogue Codes this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks for having me on.